the definition of just ethnography. So I think it's a fairly common academic term, and it simply means the study of culture, of individuals and groups of people. So attaching the prefix auto to that, it changes, I guess, the point of view of the study. So instead of an outward exploration, it's an inward exploration. So it's basically trying to analyze, I guess, the self through your own set of beliefs, values, and customs, culture, basically. And the ultimate goal being, well, at least for us personally, was to strengthen, I guess, our sense of identity. We're not very scientific about it. Actually, in bios that in artist bios that I've written recently, I often say I do lay ethnography because I don't have, the right training for it. So it's more of like a casual exercise, like a layman's understanding of how ethnography is done.
Yeah, it's like also like the core practice of my work since I started being an artist full time. It was always about my identity because I was always shift around places. So like this identity is silently and it will loosely disappear. And sometimes if I'm like in a place for a long time, this is where I try to understand.
It's like how you
try to go back, processing again my identity or trying to reevaluate it again. So mostly that's one of the core parts of my practice.
Yeah, we were talking about how to answer these questions yesterday. So it kind of like dawned on us.
I've been doing it.
Spontaneously, that he's been dealing with this very subject, or have been using this method, auto-ethnography, in his practice since the beginning. So he mentioned that it's actually the core of his practice. And it just so happened that he didn't have the vocabulary for it. And so now that we've collaborated, there's this realization that, okay, this is something that you've always been doing in your practice. And it's nice to be able to talk about it more articulately this time.
Yes, because like I can't go toward another direction without understanding where I came from. So it was like a really important subject matter in my artworks.
There was a mention of the realizations. I think one of the more important realizations that I've had in this collaboration was that it's a huge privilege to be able to carry out, auto-ethnographic exercises. Because, let's face it, these things are not basic needs. To theorize about the self, study the self, maybe even academize it a little bit. It's such a privilege to be able to do that. Like, not all people have the time, space, and other resources to do these things. And I just want to acknowledge that, the two of us are privileged enough to be able to carry out this exercise. And on better days, I like to think that auto-ethnography during the time that we were deep in it was a productive use of our time, because it has something to contribute to others, especially beyond what we have to personally gain from it. So in terms of contribution, I'm talking about the exhibition itself, the art per se, because art has its intrinsic, powers to affect, to move, and to maybe, if we're going to be ambitious about it, change minds. And I think that's one of the realizations that I wanted to impart today.
I don't really try to talk. I always try to analyze my background all the time whenever I have projects. like I have an upcoming project, so I'm trying to dive into that again, identity, but through more storytelling. Like I always think about how my father would always like tell this kind of stories, and it's always interesting all the time. Every time he repeats them, also it's still interesting to me. So I kind of want to get that sort of momentum he always has when telling stories. So I kind of want to have that input in my work all the time, where I try to tell stories, try to remember things, try to understand always my identity, because it's always my number one problem, where I can't really, until now, I can still really figure out things. And I always, when I was trying to go through these Filipino books made by foreign writers, it's always interesting seeing their perspectiveness, and it's like, which is really bizarre sometimes and sometimes interesting, but mostly bizarre. But yeah, the shifting is really still, it's always something new that to discover. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, since we work in the same physical space, like I would observe how he struggles with that, with the concept of his self-identity, I guess, is what I would term it, because he's been around. Like he's originally from Kuwait, and then Italy,
Kuwait, then Italy, then here. So it's like the identity really, the language system, the identity is like really all over the place. So it's something really, until now, it's like really chaotic for me, the language system. So yeah.
So sometimes I wonder what it feels like to be multilingual, or I mean, in the past, I would imagine what it was like, and then now that I live with him, I kind of know what it's like. So it's a struggle, especially if like acquiring in the process of acquiring a language, in the middle of it, you suddenly move to another place where the language is different, and so you're not able to completely absorb or acquire that language that you first learned, and then moving to a different place with
it's like when I came here, I was mostly speaking English, but when we were in Isabela, in Ilagan, they speak like different native
dialects,
different tongues, like Ibanag, Ilocano. So my mom told us like, okay, let's just stick to Tagalog, so it's easier for all of us not to be too confusing with the other dialects. But I wish I knew how to speak Ibanag or Ilocano.
Well, come to think of it, maybe that's why you became an artist. Like art can be the proxy language if you don't have the literal language to use to express thoughts and ideas. So, Cos mentioned earlier that he's been looking up history books. I can only guess that it's because of the same reason, like self-discovery, etc., etc. And I got into it as well, but he was the first one to really collect these digital copies of history books. Most of them
through archive.org.
On archive.org. There's a collection there of books produced during the colonial era. So these books are authored by mostly Western academics who were colonists of the Philippines. So they lived here, they assimilated, they got to know the people, etc. And for Wester's case specifically, he wrote the book, The Philippine Islands and Their People. And we found a copy that was very badly photocopied, which is why the studies that were used for the series Mateo, a Typical Filipino, which is a painting using my usual medium, which is charcoal suspended in oil, is blacked out. Sorry, election votes in the background. Yeah, so the reason Mateo is blacked out is because the copy we acquired was a bad photocopy. So in photocopying, sometimes you get prints that are very blacked out, has streaks, has dust, ink smears, and other imperfections. And we thought that it was an apt visual metaphor for the kind of stereotyping that Western academics performed or did in writing these history books. They described Mateo as the typical Filipino, despite his skin being a little too dark for a Filipino. And then he went on to say that it's actually in the text. Let me just try to access that now. He was also sent to America for a while. Worcester said that he was much improved, which I think I mentioned in the text. Like after having spent some time in America and learned their ways, he suddenly became industrious, intelligent, mild-mannered. I'm not quoting verbatim, but this is what I remember from what I wrote or what we wrote together. Here, and there I found it. So if I may share, Mateo Francisco, which was his full name, history has him as a typical Filipino despite being a little too dark. And in his youth, he had no special advantages. And even when his colonizer praised him, it was in order to other him. So he was described as being intelligent, quite sober, industrious, honest, true, a living demonstration of the natives' capability for improvement. But that is after some kind of intervention, so after some evangelizing. And this took the form of a trip or a stay in the United States. And I think we kind of like gravitated towards him because during the time we were on a quest, on a spontaneous, it wasn't really like a planned thing, but we were on a kind of spontaneous quest for self-identity and for Mateo to be declared the typical Filipino was kind of like a big point of discussion for us, especially because we both look nothing like him. If you look for, and we both identify as Filipino, but we don't look anything like the typical Filipino according to this colonist. But yeah, it was interesting to find out that the typical Filipino according to an outsider is this, and that we look nothing like him. And yeah, so we kind of like obsessed over that. Actually, the first two
that
Mateo,
specific image.
Yeah, the first two Mateo paintings were a part of not this exhibition, but my exhibition in CCP, where I tackled things tangential to identity. We decided to expand that dual portrait to this project, this current show that we have on at Art Informal, because it just kind of like tied in our interests. I mean, we are very different artists, I think. My methods and his methods are very different, and somehow the Mateo study kind of like bridged the two. And yeah, so we decided to expand that for the show. I think we purposefully dropped out the names of the philosophers because I think one of the funny problems in art writing is it's very easy to alienate people when you load it up with these obscure references. Well, Deleuze and Guattari are not very obscure. In fact, they fall on the extreme side of the spectrum. They've been around let me rephrase that. They've been quoted one too many times in exhibition notes, in other forms of art writing. And so we decided to just call them philosophers in the text, but without completely omitting them from the narrative, because if you'll notice towards the end of the exhibition notes, we mentioned that we can paint 1,000 plateaus on our faces. That was the phrase that I think appears in the text, and that is a direct reference to Deleuze and Guattari, who are French. One was a French philosopher, Deleuze, and Guattari, a French psychoanalyst. The phrase 1,000 plateaus is a direct reference to their collaborative text called Capitalism and Schizophrenia, of which the second volume is titled 1,000 Plateaus. So in 1,000 Plateaus, there is a chapter. All chapters actually in that volume are called individual plateaus. So as a tribute to the concept of landscape, but specifically in relation to our exhibition, I think what's important, the important takeaway was the section on faciality. So like seeing faces in non-humans, like a landscape, for example. So they said that the face is a landscape and a landscape is face. And like any work of philosophy, the text was very opaque. So it's, even for a nerd like me, it was so difficult to understand. So I think I'll just zero in on the little bit that I do understand. And this was about how the face is a landscape and the landscape is a face, and that this concept is actually most appreciated in art and design. So to maybe make that a little bit more concrete, let's say in architecture, we recognize a certain place or a certain landscape based on the buildings and the structures that are found in that specific place. And in film, the close-up shot, you know, like in film, there are like close-up shots into the face. And according to Deleuze and Guattari, filmmakers use that specific style of shooting to assert that the face is a landscape, because when you do a close-up, the face is kind of abstracted and it becomes something that can be charted and, you know, that can be known. And what else did they, in painting also, they say that the face is treated like a landscape and the landscape is treated like a face. So I think the bottom line is, I wrote something in the notes that we did together yesterday. The bottom line is, or our main takeaway from the text is, the face is to the body what the landscape is to the world. So it's like a gateway to identity, the face, as well as the landscape, but in relation to the world. So I think that it was a very powerful anchor to use for the exhibition, which is why it ended up in the notes.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, it was an interesting idea that I had. Like, I have this mindset of like, whenever I go around, I would bring my sketchbook. Like if I like something, I would draw and like make a few sketches of, if I have an idea, I would draw on the sketchbook. So I always it's always intrigued me of like, how could I put these two ideas into one work? Or like, because at first I started using text, etching to make a story on even though the paintings and the text they don't really match at all, but the idea to make it as a whole interested in me. So, but this time I kind of wanted to, this approach of making my small drawings as the frame of a painting to like sort of like in a primordial way, like very caveman approach.
That's his aesthetic.
Yeah, it's my aesthetic now.
Caveman.
Yeah, because I really wanted to go back. Well, like really I really wanted to go rewind myself, like start from fresh, like do sketches, more sketching before I start a painting, do studies of the painting, sketchbook. So I really wanted to keep the pieces on how it all started and how it ended on a painting. So I kind of wanted to how do you say it? How do you say it? Like to immortalize the studies, the moments on the wood containing the painting, which was something really, I don't know if it was doable because it was really, during pandemic, it was really hard to find like shops doing it properly, and the time and the amount of work to do it was so insane. But yeah.
Those works are a continuation of the paintings that are also on show right now at CCP. That show is called, the new word for world is Archipelago, which riffs off a book by Ursula Le Guin. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. The book is called The Word for World is Forest. So the show in CCP argues for geographic interconnectedness in the face of the climate crisis. And it appears these paintings that we showed just now appear in the exhibition that I share with Cos, because the non-image featured on those paintings are taken from the same book, The Philippine Islands and Their People. So the specks that you see on the surface of the canvas are actually xerox dust. It's xerox noise. You know how in powder, what do you call it? Powder xerox machines, it leaves a lot of specks on the page. Like, it's very characteristic of xerox prints to have these like dust marks. So what I did was magnify them several thousands of times. It's not a monumental task thanks to Photoshop. So when you magnify, I discovered that when you magnify xerox dust, they start to appear like little islands. So I like to think of the non-image, now that the dust have been magnified, as like a congregation, like an assembly of islands. And I just used Gaian because, Gaia, like Pangaea, referencing Pangaea, like the supercontinent, where, geographically speaking, we were all connected. So I think that's what you were asking earlier. Why is this the title? So yeah, that's the reason behind it. The way we know an atlas today is it's a collection of maps, right? Like as simple as that. But I read that in the beginning, an atlas can be much more comprehensive than that. So before the advent of technology, especially geographically speaking, atlases contained not just maps, and inaccurate maps at that, because during the time, they didn't have the technology to be precise about, charting land and charting water. So it also contained cosmologies, basically, however way ancient people understood the world. So it contained also texts, speculative drawings about the world, etc. So the work atlaser Well, atlaser simply means a person who creates the atlas, who writes the atlas, or who draws the atlas. And the work that, the diptych work, it's actually, the diptych.
Oh, sorry.
The one in the green frame, or the ones in green frames. Yeah, so these feature, they're not really drawings per se, because they're marks made by myself in the process of sharpening my pencils for drawing text. So they're random marks, because when I draw text, it's important that the point of the pencil is very, very sharp. Otherwise, it will be difficult to confine the marks within the outline of the letter. So what happens is, every few minutes, I have to rub the sides of the point of the graphite pencil on paper to keep it sharp. And then I realized, after doing this several times on several sheets of paper, that the marks kind of look like landscape. I'm not sure if I'm forcing this visual, but some of them actually look like erupting volcanoes if you have a closer look. So in a way, put together or stacked together that way, it looked like an atlas in the old world sense of the word. And then I paired it with an empty frame, because during in the past, people could only, or even today actually, we can only know so much. I think I'm referencing this cliche, I would say, that the more you know, the more there is yet to know. So you may know a lot now, but the more that you delve into that subject, you will find more discoveries, and that the amount of discoveries that are waiting to be discovered is disproportionate to the knowledge that you have now, which is why that work is called the Atlaser. Knows everything and at the same time nothing. Really, I wanted to use copper because copper is one of the metals that's commonly mined in the Philippines, but I didn't have copper at the time. And actually, it was just like an idea that I've had, not really an idea I've had, but an idea that was, that Maya Munoz kept bugging me about to try. I go, nice, you should try silver in drawing your text. And then finally, I don't know.
Actually, she mentioned it to me years ago, like instead of using ball pen, like, oh, why don't you use silver point on your drawing? I think it would look great. But I didn't listen to her. Now I'm like kicking myself. Why didn't I use it? Because it's such a beautiful process. It's just,
yeah, it's pretty cool. It's high stakes to work with silver because you cannot erase it.
Yeah.
So you can't make mistakes. And I was really nervous about, drawing this text using silver, because I felt like I would have to, do over the thing several times. But luckily I didn't have to. And but it was difficult in that I had to hold my breath for a long time, in fear of, going over the lines and stuff. But, I just realized this now, as in spontaneously, just now, that, silver is close to, like, next to gold. Like, it carries a certain weight, a certain importance. So I think as an afterthought, it might be, like, related to the concept in that association. Yeah,
it's just scheduling. Like I really wanted to back out from the show because I was stressing over the etching because there was nobody to take the project because they were all busy with other
fabricators.
The fabricators were all busy with other stuff, so there was no time anymore. and because I also had to, after the laser, I had to polish it, like construct the frame and everything. So I didn't know that there was time. But then, ideally, I was gonna make like 8 or 10 paintings. But then the baby won't let me.
Was not without struggle and sacrifice and many fights.
And a lot of crying in the corners.
Lots of crying, like yeah. It was really difficult.
Yeah, but it was.
But we hopped over that mountain.
Because I work with oils a lot, it's like a very messy process with everything. So all the oils are all scattered whenever I paint. And nice because he's like very delicate with her stuff, so everything needs to be
in a certain way,
neat and tied up and everything. So it's like very.
It's chaotic and like, neat at the same time.
Yeah, it's like I don't know, but still interesting process-wise because we always like ask ourselves like, is this good enough? Is this finished? Is this interesting? Like the last painting I did, like that was supposed to be part of the show, which I was still like contemplating if it should be part of it or not because I was still undecided with how it looked. But I don't know.
No, I think what Tina observed earlier was like the perfect description of the kind of harmony, I guess.
Yeah, it is. But I don't. Yeah. Sorry, lost it.
Maybe going back to what you were saying, yun nga, na parang we are able, I guess through the years, because we've been together for quite some time, wherever we are now in this harmony that I speak of, was not something that happened overnight. Like it was it was work. Like it took us, years to get where we are, which is probably why we waited this long before officially collaborating. Like maybe we could have, done a 2-person show years back, but definitely it wouldn't be as successful as you say.
Because this pandemic really made personally made me think more about my artwork, like how to process it more.
He's been asking me a lot about like how to, about his ideas, how to flesh it out.
I'm glad that instead of doing it like a 2-person show years ago, we waited it out. At least we understood each other and everything. Then, parang mas.
Yeah, maybe the baby made it click. Actually, maybe without life, we wouldn't have the right kind of mindset to come together and make things work together without at the same time producing a show that looks flat, I guess. Because I think that's what I really like about our show, that you can see that there are 2 people who made it happen, but at the same time, it feels like it's just one show. So I take pride in that. And I think it's something that we wouldn't have been able to pull off earlier. So it's a confluence of the several circumstances, the pandemic, having a baby, sharing a space together. Actually, I think to alleviate some of the stress, because I recognize that I can be stressful to work with because I really need things to be in a certain way. He's decided to take up the space outside this enclosed room. This enclosed room where we are right now is my studio, and he's squatting outside. But that's a much bigger space. The landing of the stairs leading to the other rooms, that's where he works. So but sometimes he works here, sometimes I work there. And it's nice to be able to be together all the time because we're productive all the time. And, casual conversations over lunch turn into, moments of productivity when we say, oh, I have this idea. Can we talk about it? And then, we kind of like accomplish things in very spontaneous and casual ways.